Hello, friends of the paranormal. This is your co-host Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist Patty Wilson. Patty, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing okay. It's a little hot, a little dry, but overall, I'm doing all right as long as my AC holds out.
Amen to that, sister. So I do want to make an announcement right now that we are going to be taking a short respite from recording. The Paranormalist podcast is not going to go away, so fear not. But we're looking at taking a few weeks to take care of some things that we just have slipped by the wayside, so we really need to take care of. So in the interim, we encourage you to go back and look at our catalog of episodes. If you are just finding us, please click the subscribe button. We will be back, promise. Click the like. In the description down below of this podcast, there will be everything paranormalist related from our Facebook groups, email address, Patty's books on Amazon, Patty's blog. It will all be there. And I think that's all I have to say, unless you want to say something to our viewers and listeners about us taking a couple weeks off.
The only thing I wanted them to know is that we are, going to have some time to take care of some stuff, but we are going to miss you. We are definitely coming back. And while we're working on our other projects, I will be putting together some interesting podcasts, I hope.
Very good. So with that, how about you tell us what the topic for this podcast will be?
So this is anthropomorphic animals. Sounds boring, but it's not. It's about hybrids. So we know that in ancient mythology and folklore, there's, Pan, and there's the satyrs, and there's all these sirens and mythical creatures. And we read these old texts and we think, wow, they had a great imagination, or how gullible and naive were they to believe that there was a Leviathan, which was a huge whale that could swallow a man and then spit him out whole.
Isn't there a biblical reference of that, though?
There is. So when you go to the Bible and to the Gnostic books that surround the Bible, which we've talked about before, those are books that were removed from the Bible by the Catholic Church, saying that they were not for edification. And but these books are actually mentioned. Some of them are actually mentioned in the text of the Bible where it is at now. So I wanted to share, because obviously in the Old Testament, there were people who referenced some of these books. In the New Testament, Christ actually quotes out of the book of Jasher and references things from the book of Jasher and the book of Enoch, which are the two most popular of the Gnostic texts. And I wanted to share because, for example, how many of you are familiar with the Starbucks logo?
Oh, it looks like a mermaid,
Yep.
sort of. Yeah. Yeah. But I drink a lot of this, but it's not Starbucks.
So in Joshua 10:13, they talk about a being that would qualify as a mermaid. In Jasher 4:18, they explain a lot about how this happened. So it says, and their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took them wives, meaning the watchers, or the judges and rulers, and took them wives by forcing from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of the men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowl of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted its ways upon earth, all men and animals. That was just before the flood, when the Lord was not happy with the corruption and sin of the earth that had been taught by the fallen angels, the watchers. So God looked at genetics. If you go to Genesis 6, the reason that Noah was chosen is because his bloodline remained pure. It was exactly the same as the bloodline of Adam. It actually comes from the bloodline of Adam. And he wanted somebody who was obedient to his ways and who had a pure bloodline, and therefore Noah got chosen to build the ark and do all of this. So the DNA of a person, the DNA is very important in God's language. And we need to recognize that. So one of the things that these watchers, these fallen angels, had done is they had corrupted the women of the earth, and they had intermingled with them, both in human form and in animal form. So, for example, the satyr was, and again, it tells you that they were chosen, they were taken, they weren't freely going off their own free will, they were taken. It said by force. So, and they were forced into these liaisons, and these fallen angels, these watchers, actually created the Nephilim, which are the offspring of humans and the angelic, in many various forms. They corrupted the DNA by doing this and shape-shifting into these various animals and forms in order to do that. Now, there's an ancient Egyptian text. If you're really interested in it, I will be happy to tell you more about it, from the same time period, that talks about two things happening, which is really interesting. First, that the women who were forced from their husbands into being in liaisons with the watchers, that oftentimes they died in birth, the beings being so large and, you know, of a different species. So they called it, there's in the document, it says they were torn asunder at their navel as the child erupted out of them. So because it was too big to give birth in any other way. And so they died. But there were angelic beings that actually said to some of the women, if you want to survive, you allow us to alter your DNA, and we'll turn you into something else. And then you'll be able to survive the birthing process. And that is where the origin of sirens comes in. They would make them into these large fish-bodied women. And they were large enough now to give birth without dying. And some of these women submitted to this because they didn't want to have to suffer and die. And so they agreed to this practice. Now, others gave birth to beings that are beings of myth. For example, we're all familiar with the Pine Barrens and the story of the Jersey Devil. And basically the story of the Jersey Devil is like, there was this woman and she had many children. She was, she just was overwhelmed. She didn't have the finances and the wherewithal, and she was exhausted from all the kids. She gets pregnant again. And as she gives birth to this child, she screams, some horrible epitaph, something like Satan, take this child, or damn this child, or something. And when the baby is born, according to the story, the midwife delivers what looks like a small hooved entity with horns that quickly, within seconds, begins to grow and becomes the adult Jersey Devil in a few moments, flying around the room and finally breaking out the window and leaving. And thus is born the Jersey Devil, from the woman whose mother, everybody calls her Mother Leeds in most of the story. So you could look the story up if you want. And then this being has lived from that point forward. Now, the story's origins, at least in the European community, starts in the early 1700s. There were Native American legends of a demonic half-horse entity that lived in that region. I don't know if this was a bastardization of that being or if this is the origin story for that being. But for just a minute, I want you to suppose this thing wasn't a legend, that this was actually a being that was created as part Nephilim, part human, part angel, and that she was forced into that relationship. You could see why she was angry. You could see why she was in great pain. It was tearing her apart. And then this thing, there's another element to it that you only see in these stories. Usually the gestation period is much shorter than a normal 9-month pregnancy, and the birth is much different. And certainly you can't get a more bizarre birth than a small, horse-hooved entity emerging with wings on its back that very quickly, within minutes, begins to fly and then grows to its adult size and then breaks out the window and leaves, and has been seen off and on to this day. There are still stories of the Jersey Devil being sighted both in the Pine Barrens and down in the Philadelphia area. So what if? What if all the crazy stories of all the crazy beings weren't just legends, but they're based on far off events from the past? For example, from Leviticus 17:7, and they shall no more offer their sacrifices unto devils, which translates as satyr, after whom they have gone whoring. This shall be a statute forever unto them throughout their generations. Isaiah. But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and the satyrs will dance there. So they believed the satyrs were real beings, that they were an abomination that came from these liaisons with these angelic creatures. Roman mythology talks about a part goat man, a part human, part goat man. In Greek mythology, they talk about a horse that was part human and part horse. It sounds insane, and it sounds like it couldn't possibly be true, but I could take you through all of this, and you'll see time and time again. There's another creature that they've actually found statues and carvings of a being that was a large, like 3 to 5 times as large as a human being, lion-headed entity. It was human from the neck down, but lion-headed. And this being is mentioned in different texts. So in Samuel, in the book of Samuel, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went down also and slew a lion in the midst of the pit in the time of the snow. So they're making a differentiation between lion-like men and the animal. So they assume that you're going to believe this is true. Now, I want to say something here. So Saint Christopher, in the original text, he is referred to as a dog-faced man from an island of dog-faced people. The first paintings of Saint Christopher that existed painted him with a dog's head, and that there was an entire island filled with these people. You can find references to them other places as well, and they talk about them as though they are absolutely real. How about Pliny the Elder, 1st century and AD? Now, Pliny quotes the Manta Cora. It has the face and ears of a human being, gray eyes, a triple row of teeth that meet like the teeth of a comb, a lion's body of blood red color, and a voice like panpipes blended with trumpet. It stings with a tail like a scorpion. It is very fast and has a special appetite for human flesh. Or the griffin. Supposedly, the Queen of Tartaria hunted the Spaniards down using griffins, like hound dogs. It's in the notes of the surviving Spaniards who explored what we now call California. Are they making it up? Are they all making it up? We can continue on. Bartholomew in 13th century AD said that in India there was a beast of wonderly shape, and it is like the bear in body and in hair, and to a man in face, and hath a bright red head and a full great mouth of horrible, and in either jaws 3 rows of teeth distinguishing atween. The outer limbs thereof be as if the outer limbs of a lion, and his tail be like a wild scorpion's sting, and smiteth with hard bristle pricks like a swine, and hath a horrible voice, the voice of a trumpet. He runneth full swiftly and eateth men. Among these beasts of the earth is none found more cruel, nor more wonderly shaped, as Aviaskin says. And this beast is called Birokos in Greek. Again, a totally different nationality of people who are speaking of it. In Revelation, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns of gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, horses with men's faces. And their hair has the hair of women, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running into battle, and tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power to hurt men was for 5 months. Are these Nephilim? There are just some amazing, there's Egyptian lion-headed god called Apitamilk, which is, and in Persia, the same god is served, and he's called Mithra, and it's a human body, a winged being, and a lion's head. And it's pretty much exactly the same thing. In Germany, they also found a lion-headed deity in a cave. It's a 32,000-year-old sculpture of a half lion, half human, carved in mammoth ivory using flint knives. It is the oldest known zoomorphic example of a sculpture in the world.
It's cool.
It is. Now, I want to take you to something else that I found fascinating. This is Science Magazine. I said DNA is a lot more important than we ever think. We think about DNA testing as, well, to see if that's your baby, or to find a lost relative, or maybe a match for a kidney donor, or just for fun. A lot of people do their DNA for fun. But there's a lot more to it. I want to tell you a little story. So, the grizzly bear, there's 3 distinct groups of grizzly bears. These in British Columbia. I can't speak today. And scientists were interested in why these 3 groups of grizzly bears only stayed in their own area. They never left. They never intermingled. They never mated outside of their area. And it was interesting. They wanted to know why this was. They colonized the islands off of the British Columbian coast, and in 2011, they set up this bear hunting or bear working group to understand why the bears stayed on their islands, didn't cross, didn't, like I said, intermingle and mate. And they found that part of it was because they had plenty of supplies. They had plenty of food. They didn't need to go elsewhere. That would have been something that would have driven them out. However, there are also groups of people that live on each of these islands, and they found a correlation between the bear DNA and the group of people on those islands. So the bear's DNA seemed to eventually assimilate in pieces of the DNA of the humans. And I'm not necessarily saying that anything bad or janky went on. I'm saying that they somehow coordinated it inadvertently. I don't know. But here's the thing. It says the DNA markers, regions of the genome that change frequently compared to other sections to determine how the bears were to each other, how the bears were related to each other. The scientists found 3 distinct genetic groups of bears living in the study area. But they could not find any obvious physical barrier keeping them apart. The boundaries between the groups didn't correspond to the location of the waters, or especially rugged snow escapes, or any of that. But they didn't travel because they didn't need to, basically. One thing did correlate with the bears' distribution, however: indigenous language families. So native families that spoke specific languages. We were looking at language maps and noticed a striking visual similarity. The researcher said, when the researchers analyzed the genetic interrelatedness of the bears within and without the area's 3 language families, they found grizzly bears living within a language family's boundaries were more genetically similar to one another than bears living outside of them. So they're genetically the same. They should be. There's no anything. And yet they seem to gravitate to a particular language family, and their DNA is somehow separated and more similar to the DNA of the people from that particular region.
That's extraordinarily curious.
I read this with great interest because it makes, genetically speaking, it makes no sense. How does a language family for humans have any bearing on the DNA of an animal?
It shouldn't.
It shouldn't, but apparently it does.
Oh.
That's fascinating to me. And there'll be people saying, well, I don't understand what that has to do with the Nephilim. What if there are still strands of the Nephilim blood? Not only just remember, it wasn't just in ours. They were mating with animals as well. That was in their blood as well as ours. So let's take a couple minutes and talk about some stories. Like I said, there are just so many of these. I want to talk a little bit about the strange creatures. So we did talk about Leviathan. And in Job, it says, casteth thou out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord, which lettest thou down? So they're talking about this giant fish. Now, throughout history, there are stories from sailors of huge giant fish that came up and swallowed humans. Huge whales, 10 times the size of a whale we've seen today. Now, I will grant you there's some poetic license, some creativity, lack of translation abilities. All those things may kick into this mix. But at the end of the day, a whale large enough to swallow a ship is still insane. And yet there are many stories of it. How about the lowly unicorn, our mythical creature with the horn on its head? In Numbers, the Bible talks about the unicorn. God brought him forth out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn. He shall eat up the nations of his enemy, and shall break their bones and pierce them through with arrows. They assumed we knew what a unicorn was, and that they're a very strong entity. Why would they reference it otherwise?
Well, I mean, unless it was such a the only explanation I could have to answer your question there would be that it was such a well-known tale, like it is today,
right?
That it was used as
an allegory.
Allegory, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And that's a possibility, but it was interesting that it's actually mentioned as a real entity in there. So we'll go to the Gnostic books and Enoch real quick. It talks about dragons and serpents, and almost every culture on the planet has stories of dragons and serpents. Almost every culture has animal tales. If you come to America, the Erie Indians, early on in the settlers first arrived here, they were warned about the cat people up on Lake Erie. There was the Erie Indians. That's how they got the name Lake Erie. And the first settlers there heard these bizarre tales about cat people. You know, they were told that these beings they had cats' heads and long claws, but they walked on 2 legs like a man. And they looked, they had the tail of a mountain lion, and they would drop to all 4s and run very fast, and they would kill men and eat them. We've heard similar tales of dogmen. Stories, over time you would expect them to die out, but I'm going to tell you a story from 1980 in Maryland, in Wicomonik County. So this was in the fall. There was a group of 4 young people out parking in the dark. Leave that to your imagination as to why. Don't know why for sure. Anyhow, they were in this in the area of this landfill, in the area where they were at, and they noted at some point that there were yellow eyes looking through one of the windows at them. You know how a cat's eyes reflect and get that yellow? That's what they noted, that look. So they yelled, started the car, and took off. They calmed down, and they're like, yeah, that's just crazy. They go and they tell a couple buddies, and the buddies are like, dude, you got spoofed. Somebody's playing with you. So they all went piling back. Now they got reinforcements, so they're a little braver. And this time the buddies bring a second car. So now they're parked so that they're able to like control. They have the beam of light making a really bright central area in front of both vehicles, and they're sitting there waiting. And I'm pretty sure in an hour they got pretty bored. And they're like, is it going to come back? Blah, blah, blah. The other guys are laughing, going, stupid jerks making up a joke. If this thing doesn't show soon, man, we're out of here. And that's when something happens. About an hour into this vigil, they see crouching in the edge of the light a shadowy figure that stood up on 2 feet to reveal long frame, took a few steps into the light, then averted to all 4 legs, dropped down onto its legs, and gracefully crept toward the cars as if curious, like a cat,
Yeah.
stalking. But it was man-sized, whatever this thing was. The startled onlookers could see it was not a human. There was no other animal or anything like that could possibly be. It did not appear to be a person in a costume. It was moving, very cat-like way, very slinking way. It had long claws, a thin tail, and a face that was a mixture of human and feline features with glowing yellow eyes. The kids are like freaking out, and at that point the animal decides to dash out one of the cars and smacks into the car. The kids in the car turn the car on, the other kids flip their car on all the way and drop her into gear, and they start taking out, right? As they're pulling away, they hear this high howling. Anybody's ever heard a mountain lion scream? It was like that from the description. Like somewhere between a woman screaming and a baby crying. And that's always how I've ever heard the mountain lions described. They could see this thing coming after them. Like it was running down the highway after them. It didn't take long for them to ditch it though, because the car simply could go faster. They finally get away. They get to a place where there's a parking lot and there's lights and it's stable. And there's, it's a place that seems safe. So they pull the cars over, they get out, and they're like, what the heck was that? And they're like exchanging what they saw. And one of the guys looked down at his car and he said, it says there are deep gashes in the metal and paw prints on the windows. They actually called the police at that point, and they couldn't find anything out about it. There were other unverified reports over the next few weeks in the same general area. There were also park rangers reporting finding finding multiple maimed deer carcasses along the trails near the river that had been mangled by a large and powerful animal. And they didn't eat them. They just mangled them up and killed them. What was it? To this day, weird. Nobody knows. Isn't it? Yeah, a cat will if it's a mountain lion, it'll tend to drag its prey off and eat it at its leisure. A lot of times it'll try to drag it up into a tree. If it's small enough, it can get it up there. Safer place to eat. You don't have to watch your back because another thing might come along and want to take it, like a bear or another mountain lion. So if you're up in a tree and you've wedged this up in a tree, you're in a lot better position, and that's how they tend to do it. Jaguars do it. A lot of cat predators literally drag their prey off to a safer spot and often up into a tree where they can somehow wedge it and try to eat without the worry of being attacked. So I just thought that was a fascinating story because it's a man-like cat thing. So there's another strange cat being that was reported in Sonora, California in around 2005. This would be in the Sierra Nevada mountains. According to the person, she was out hanging up her laundry and on the clothesline, and her kids were playing right around the edge of the garage. So she would hang up laundry and then kind of like peek at the kids and hang up a couple pieces and peek at the kids. Didn't expect anything, but she's just keeping an eye on them. And that's when she saw something peeking around the other side of the garage at her. She defined it as it was a cat-shaped head on a human body, and it was peeking around the other corner of her garage. She froze. The entity seemed to get the impression that she saw it, and its eyes widened and the ears laid back. The head went up as though it was, sensing danger. She estimates that this cat person thing was about 5'7". It had beautiful stripes on its fur, almost like a gray tabby. And she said, but the fur was white with orange and dark markings in it. It's almost lion-like.
Yeah.
Or tiger-like, I guess. And that's how she described it. She said it had a breast like a woman and arms and legs proportional to a woman. The witness said she felt this entity's emotions and that it was a young lady of whatever race it was, and that it was an accident she had been seen, and she was scared because they're told not to let themselves be seen, whatever these things are. This is her impression of the look on its face. She said it was taken aback and it stepped backwards, slinking around along the wall, and then turned and ran around the corner and was gone. It headed for the tree line, and she said, I remember its eyes were almond-shaped and emerald green in color, very beautiful. I did not feel threatened in any way, but I felt like I understood that this creature was more afraid of me than I was of it. It was an accident. I wasn't supposed to see her. Curiosity got the cat. I just thought that was a really interesting story because I can almost imagine what this must have looked like for her. Another story from that same region, two joggers were out in the area. They were jogging. They heard these shrill cries like a mountain lion. They froze. Now, just so people know, mountain lions are definitely real creatures, these mountain lions. And as the hiking trails and jogging trails have gotten more and more rustic, going further out into the woods, there are every year several people killed by mountain lions. Mostly they're out hiking or jogging and they stumble into an area where there's a mountain lion, or they get stalked by a mountain lion. There's also people who've been attacked in their backyards because the mountain lion took exception or was there looking for food. So they're a real creature. So I'm sure the first thing that came into mind was not a mythical beast, a zoological issue. It's, oh my gosh, there's a mountain lion. And that's exactly what they were looking for. And that's what they saw. They saw a mountain lion coming out onto the trail. And it looked like a regular mountain lion until it had studied them for a couple seconds, and then it stood up on 2 feet, staring them face to face. And then you could see that it was a mix between a cougar and a human. The arms were long and equipped with formidable claws. The hikers were already backing away, trying to, give it distance, whatever it was. Whenever it let out another squeal or scream, at that moment, it dropped back to its feet and gave another cry and turned and loped back into the woods. But they have no doubt it had both human and cat-like features. Don't know what it is, but obviously they've been seen. There are stories from Native Americans, as I said, not just the Erie, but a lot of other places where they talk about bear creatures, they talk about cat creatures. As I said, you don't have to go very far to find out that St. Patrick was a dog-headed man. You don't have to go very far to find out a lot of this stuff has an origin in many cultures. So if it's not just something that's created by one culture and left there. These are stories that are are timeless, and every culture seems to have some version of it. If you go to Africa, they'll talk about the jaguar people, which are these jaguar cat creatures that eat humans, and they stand up and walk on 2 feet and will drop to all fours to hunt. And, they're there all over the world in some form. You have the sirens who supposedly lured humans to their doom by singing this song that enchanted them. There's stories of mermaids being seen, within the last year, right off of Israel. There are multiple reports of mermaids being seen in the water and on the edge of the beach, right where the water is still lapping on them. And they described it as a mix of a young girl and a dolphin. It sometimes will swim deep into the water and perform acrobatic tricks and then disappear behind the waves, and the people on the beach are all enthralled by what they're seeing. The town has been collecting the stories and trying to understand what it is. They've put out ships to locate it, but nobody has. There's a really cool story about an NBC investigative team that was there for something else in 2010. And they were kind of taking a break and had heard the story. So they were like, let's just take a little break and go down to the beach for a while. It's a good way to kill a couple hours. According to this, they spotted the mermaid, but were unable to track it. And they weren't able to get any video of it, but you can hear the video on the video. You can hear them screaming, "Oh my gosh, look at that, look at that." There's other people yelling, "Do you see it too? Do you see it too?" And then yelling, "Yes, it looks like a mermaid. Oh my gosh, I think it's a mermaid." And like you can see something moving in the water, but it's nighttime, so it's kind of, they didn't have the equipment they needed to do something like that. In China, they're seeing dragons. In 2014, there were many stories of dragons being spotted at a local library. I'm not sure why, but they were on security camera footage. They were at a Buddhist temple. They were seen. 2004, a photographer caught what looked like one on the railroad in the area of Tibet. They've been seen outside of airplane windows. Two long, scaly creatures flying above the Himalaya mountains, keeping pace with and playing tag with the plane. Imagine looking out the window and seeing that.
Another evacuation moment.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just, there are so many of these stories. There's a really cool story about the Tanawa. The Tanawa is in New Zealand. There's this area that's owned it's by a guy named Pitta Whittire, who used Google Earth as a way to look through the area that where the property is at, and it's obviously there's a beachfront, and they wanted to build chalets there on the beach for tourists. So he's looking at this footage and trying to figure out, where's the best places to put them and all of this. And so as he's doing this, he's watching the water right off the beach from Google Earth. You can see a large swath of land, and he sees something rippling through it, and he starts flipping down. He claims that he saw a giant sea creature in the water moving just under the surface, and there's footage of it if people want to go check it out.
Which I'm kind of surprised. Usually if somebody finds something like that, the very quickly gets blurred.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He says he dismissed it as hang on here. As like people, critics were saying, "Oh, it's the wake of a boat." He's like, "No, there were no boats on the water at the time. There was no characteristic white foam. There was nothing to cause that churning up. This was different." And for those of you who've heard of the Naga, which are like these in Thailand, they talk about the Naga, which are a kind of sea serpent, snaky creature. They have been reported as near as like 2015. There was somebody who discovered a Naga near their pond, and they attempted to catch it, and they could not. And one of the weirdest creatures, so I want to go back real quick and talk about, so if these Nephilim exist, there are documents that indicate that after the flood, they couldn't die because they were part human and part animal, or part angel, and there was no end story for them. So they couldn't go to heaven because they were an abomination to God. And they were not the ones that went to hell, the angels that had fallen, the watchers who had done all of this. Some of them were chained under the earth and in hell and what have you. That's where this was all created for. So they were left bodiless, corporally challenged, shall we say, as a spirit on the planet. Some of these Nephilim that did not die found that they had to feed in different ways. So when we talk about vampire stories, they very well might be talking about Nephilim who lived for hundreds and hundreds of years and have to feed off of human flesh or human blood. They talk about beings that suck energy and eat pain. These very well may be Nephilims. There is a tale in the Philippine Islands of a thing called the aswang, which is very much a shape-shifting, blood-drinking creature that preys on humans and animals alike. And it is about as evil as you can get. So imagine a being that is in a hooded cape wrapped around its body and has fangs like a snake and eyes that are like a goat's, and it's human in shape. It looks like a female or a male human, and it can shapeshift and pretend it's like a baby goat or a child or something that might draw you near. And then it shifts and attacks you, attempts to feed off of you. And there are so many stories of this. In 2014, there were stories in the Botanimus area telling people to not linger, don't stay in the area. There was a story that there was a group of these Aswang riding a big truck in the area, traveling through the area, and that they were known to pull over at night so they could feed. So don't stop, don't stay anywhere. Don't pause, don't go near them. And this was a message put out by the police. Now, later, the police would say they deny any such report and believe the story was a hoax. But at the time, there was a quote in the newspaper saying that Sergeant Tomas was quoted as saying, warning to everyone in the Batangas region, don't loiter around at night. A group of Ashwang are riding a big truck from Kapiskam Sur and is already in the area. Don't trust anyone you don't know. This is not a joke, from the police. And then the name of the barrack. Interesting stuff. So one of the things as I said, I've been studying for quite a while now, is I'm understanding that instead of there being all these different desperate narratives, like the Bigfoot narrative is separate from the alien narrative, which is separate from the other cryptids and all of this, that it might all be one narrative, and it might go all the way back to the beginning of humanity and to one group of beings that have spent their eternity thus far in using humanity and damaging humanity whenever it can, because they feel that we're responsible for them getting into trouble. Because it's typical. Think about it. And there's a lot more to it. I'm simplifying it. But that they have found they can feed off us. They can impregnate us to get their young. There's a lot of things that they can do. And they shapeshift. And they present as different things in different areas. I don't know what they are, but I think it's an interesting thing that it goes all the way back to the beginning origin books. Like I said, we're talking about old Egyptian texts. We're talking about Babylonian text. We're talking about scrolls that are so ancient they're hard for modern people to even translate. And then the books that were not put in the Bible, where they talk about this on a fairly regular basis. If you're really interested, the first book of Enoch and the book of Jasher both have a lot of such stories, and I didn't even scratch the surface there. But there is just an awful lot of data indicating that whatever these things are, we're connected to them somehow in some way, like the bear story, through our DNA and through some sort of relationship we've built up with them throughout time, except we're not able to remember it well enough to piece it all together. But the texts are out there to possibly piece this together. You just have to look. There's an awful lot of interesting stories that when you lay them out become a roadmap saying this is all one tale, not 100 different stories, one tale. And we need to understand that it is an intertwining of angelic, demonic, human, and God cared about the DNA, and therefore he's angry and frustrated at the corruptions that we have allowed in many ways. And those beings haven't been able to die, so they still exist in our periphery, and they've learned to exist in our shadows. I just think it's a fascinating answer for everything. Now, is it the only answer? Of course it's not. But as time goes on, we shift, things. For example, when I was young in the field, every alien was from outer space and came with a message for mankind to, quit polluting and save the planet. And then came the ones that were stealing souls. And now they're talking about they're really demonic entities coming from elsewhere through portals. The story's changed, but the entity hasn't. Just our explanation has. So since we're not going to be here for the next few weeks, I'm going to challenge you to start looking into this stuff on your own and see what you think. Would love to hear from some of our listeners, and they can tell me what their thoughts are. With that, I'm done.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And like, Patty said, I mean, if you want to send us emails, comment on our Facebook posts, things like that, we're still around. Goodness, it's not like we're leaving the country or anything like that. It's just that, we do have some tasks that we do need to perform. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining us. And again, if you haven't subscribed already, please do consider subscribing, clicking the like or the star system on whatever platform you're listening or watching us on. And we'd very much appreciate it. And until we meet again, good night.
Good night.